For this episode, we're going to talk about football, the NFL, if you will, which I know is kind of off-brand for a podcast network that is centered around things that are generally considered nerdy or geeky, you know, comic books and video games and that kind of stuff. But you know what? This is nostalgia talk, and I have this memory that's been in my head now for a long time that I decided I would share on Nostalgia Talk. So we're going to talk about football, the NFL. Do you remember the first time that you watched football? And when I say watch football, I mean really watched it. Not that it was a game on in the background with, you know, your dad or your uncles or heck, you know, your mom, you know, who knows? Somebody in your house might have loved football, and NFL games were, I'm certain, on in the background during parties and get-togethers throughout my childhood. But I'm talking about the first time you really sat down, noticed it, watched the game, understood the rules, sort of interpreted what was going on, and was really involved in the game. Well, I can remember the first time that I got involved in and enjoyed an NFL football game. And thanks to the wonderful world of the internet, I was able to trace down the history of when that game was. And it was December 23rd, 1990. And it was the Buccaneers playing at Soldier Field against the Chicago Bears. Now at 14, I kind of knew how the rules to football worked. Probably picked some of it up in passing, and like I said, with games being on the background at parties or get-togethers that my parents were at. But probably the vast amount of football knowledge I had came from learning about how the game worked via Nintendo games like Tecmo Bowl, 10-Yard Fight, and things like that. That's where I probably got my basic knowledge. But December 23rd, 1990, don't worry folks, people who've listened to a lot of these episodes, I'm always in Germany. We are now back from Germany. This is actually our first Christmas after returning to the States from Germany. And we spent it with our relatives up in a tiny little town called La Paz, Indiana, which is just outside of Plymouth, which is just outside of South Bend, Indiana, to give you an idea. And because it is right there, South Bend is very close to Chicago. Pretty much everybody in that area is either a Colts fan or Chicago Bears fan, mostly Bears fans in that region. But yes, we had come back from Germany. I was 14 years old, and we were in La Paz visiting our family for Christmas. And come to think of it, this would probably be our last true family Christmas with my parents, my brother, my sister, and myself. After this Christmas, Jason, my older brother, would join the Army, and there would be Christmases where we'd all be back together again under one roof, but this is the last of the what I would consider childhood Christmases. And when we stayed in La Paz, we would stay with our relatives. Pretty much all my mom's side of the family lives in this one little town. And so my mom and my dad and my sister were off staying with some relative or another. My brother and I had been placed, if you will, staying with my great grandma Phoebe in her little house, which was quite charming there on the main road in La Paz. So it was cool to be just me and Jason kind of away from our parents, and staying at Grandma Phoebe's house was even cooler because she had a finished basement, and that meant Jason and I had a run of the basement. And Grandma Phoebe's basement was pretty cool. It was pretty much one part storeroom where she kept all of her extra food, which included Little Debbie's snack cakes, which I'm sure my brother and I pilfered a few of those from time to time while we were down in the basement. But the majority of it was a big open one-room area that had 2 full-size beds, a couple of bookshelves full of cool old books, and on the dresser across from the beds was a small 13-inch black and white TV. And it was on this TV that Jason and I put on the football game one night, one very cold night. Again, we were in the basement. It's December 23rd. In Indiana, pretty cold. And I think that added to the charm of staying in the basement because it's even sort of colder down there. You got to bundle up. And there's just something, I don't know, I to this day enjoy about being in a cold room all bundled up. So we turn on the little black and white TV, and there's no cable here. This is just, aerial antenna. but we're close enough to actually pick up a station. We probably picked up maybe 2 stations, but the one with the strongest signal had the football game on it. Now, neither Jason nor I were big NFL football fans. You got to remember, we just come back from Germany, so the sport you watch there is soccer, or what they call football, but I don't want to get this too confusing. So we were watching and kind of raised on soccer for the last several years. So neither Jason nor myself are big NFL football fans, but it's the strongest channel we get, and it's mildly interesting. So we put it on, just laid back in our bundles on our, each of us, like I said, had a nice full-size bed and just kind of laid there and watched the game. And that was the first time that football kind of, affected me. Like, I could keep up with the game. I understood why most of the decisions were being made, how the scoring worked. And it's just a memory that'll be with me forever. Not just because of NFL football and the Bears playing the Buccaneers in this wildly cold game. I think it even snowed during that game. But it's probably because, this would be the last sort of family in Indiana Christmas I would ever have. It's also a real sort of quiet moment with just me and my older brother Jason that I'm very fond of. It just makes me happy to remember those times. I could remember laying in that bed watching that game, not just enjoying the game and thinking, hey, I'm kind of grown up now, because I'm watching football, but I also had an awareness. Thank goodness I had this awareness at just the age of 14 that this was a special time to spend with me and my brother. Now, I don't know if Jason remembers this memory at all, but man, it has stuck with me. It's one of those moments, like I said, where I felt a little grown up because, I was watching and understanding football, which is more of a grown up game to me. And again, spending some special time with my older brother who would soon be gone, making his own way in the world. And on top of that, we were staying at my great grandma Phoebe's house, and she was an absolute delight. We loved staying with her. She always loved to play card games, particularly Rook. We'd play Rook every night. She was a very religious woman, but very sweet woman. And speaking of the religious part, there was a huge tapestry down there hanging behind the beds of Jesus. It was beautiful. It was beautifully made, beautifully done. But when you come down the stairs and you first kind of glance out of the corner of your eye in the dim lighting, it was scary because he was like slightly larger than life size. It was like, oh my goodness, who's standing over there? And then, oh, it's Jesus. Definitely things I remember about staying down in that cold, yet somehow very warm and welcoming basement. So yeah, the Bears played the Buccaneers on December 23rd, 1990. I was down in my great-grandma Phoebe's basement in La Paz, Indiana, enjoying that game, my very first full NFL game experience with my brother Jason, and it's a memory I'll always cherish. And thanks to the wonderful world of the internet, I was actually able to find an ESPN wrap-up to that exact game, which I will play as today's outro. But before we get to that, I want to thank everybody for listening to Nostalgia Talk and sharing my memories with me, and for sharing your memories with me. I get a lot of emails and messages behind the scenes after each one of these of people sharing their nostalgia around the topic. In fact, I want to read one from the Batman 1989 episode that I did not too long ago. I got a send in from Crusaders Club member Sean Urbanski, and Sean wrote, and it's about a paragraph, so stay with me on this, but I just love the fact that people are sharing. So let's take a look at what Sean wrote around the 1989 Batman episode. Sean writes, I'm a little late, but I forgot to comment on my favorite part of this episode, your first exposure to Prince, because the Prince Batman album was my first exposure to Prince. And so this is Sean's sort of his nostalgia talk around Prince, and I might do a nostalgia talk episode around Prince myself. But Sean writes, your first exposure to Prince. I've always assumed it was Purple Rain, which I'm sure was at the peak of its popularity, but no, it was the Batman movie. It reminds me of my first Prince experience. I grew up in the Twin Cities, but no, I have not purified myself in the waters of Lake Minnetonka, and I have about 10 years on you. It was the early 80s, I was in middle school. One of the local TV stations ran a music video show after the 10 p.m. news. They showed the videos that we'd see on MTV in a couple of years when St. Paul and Ridgemont eventually got cable. They would occasionally mix in video of live performances from local bands. Yes, middle school Sean, desperately hoping to see the Centerfold video by Jay Giles Band or something like that, caught a video clip of Prince from a local venue. There he was, early Prince, trench coat, and let's just say your Batman boxers could have made 3 or 4 sets of his undergarments. Yes, it weirded me out a wee bit. Nonetheless, a couple years later when 1999 came out, I had to buy the extended play cassette, and it quickly made my paper route Walkman rotation. I love that, by the way. Kind of an oddball with Black Sabbath, AC/DC, Led Zeppelin, Ozzy, Thin Lizzy, Grandmaster Flash, and the Furious Five, and others. I'm not a huge Prince fan, but I love Controversy, 1999, and Purple Rain. 1999 is my favorite by far, and not just because of its extended play cassette, it's just my favorite. Also, I felt like 1999 is a great bridge between early Prince and his popular peak of Purple Rain. And I just love that. I love the fact that you guys share the feedbacks. Thank you, Sean, for sending that in. I do think I'll probably at some point do a nostalgia talk around my Prince experience, but I was really just touched that people out there share these experiences with me. And these nostalgia talks affect people and they want to share. That is my favorite part about doing this show. So, hey, if you want to do that, there's lots of ways you can do that. You can reach out to Longbox Crusade on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. It's all at Longbox Crusade, and on YouTube at Longbox Crusade. I'd love it for you guys to put this kind of stuff in the comments. I understand that sometimes you want to write something lengthy, so you want to send an email, which is contact@longboxcrusade.com, by the way, and that's perfectly fine. But hey, I appreciate everybody who listens. You definitely share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear about your first grown-up NFL football experience. I'd love that. I highly encourage you to do that. And of course, if you want to reach out to me personally, I am at Yard Sale Artist, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. It's all at Yard Sale Artist. And thanks again for listening in on this episode of Nostalgia Talk. We will take another trip on another day.
This episode features the track Snowfall by Scott Buckley.
A little warmer inside the Kingdome than it was outside today at Soldier Field. That nice seasonal breeze coming off the lake. And the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were in town against the Bears, Robin, and the Bucs, when the temperature falls below freezing, they fall even farther.
Yes, they do, but they had a good reason to get up for this game, because they still had a shot at the playoffs going into this game. All they needed to do was win their last 2, have the Cowboys lose their last 2, and have the Saints just lose 1 of 2. The Bucs are on somewhat of a roll. They've won 2 in a row, but it would be tough.